So I know we're up against cocktail hour, so thank you for coming in and spending time with us. In case anybody's wondering, UNC did just win, so no worries there. Didn't fall victim to a 16 seed. Not getting grouped in with that population. So our discussion today is around IRA impacts on renewable energy development. What we're going to do here is I'm going to give some opening remarks, kind of a little bit about the IRA, for those who, most of you may know a lot about it, but if not, I'll fill you in a little bit. I'll introduce each panelist one at a time. They'll give some remarks about what their companies are working on related to the IRA, and then we'll do some moderated Q&A, and then open it up to you guys. And really, we just want this to be a discussion to bring whatever questions you may have. So a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. It does represent the single largest climate-related investment by the U.S. government to date. It allocated $369 billion for energy and climate initiatives to help transition the U.S. economy toward a more sustainable energy future. It establishes some long-term energy tax credit structures that support renewable energy development. However, there's still many questions that need to be answered in the final rulemaking that is ongoing from Treasury and the IRS. The funds allocated by the IRA do touch all aspects of the energy landscape, so it's not just renewable. There's funds in there for nuclear, there's even funds in there for some natural gas generation, and it does provide a little bit of money for transmission infrastructure build as well. In this panel, we are going to discuss how the IRA has impacted renewable energy development. Our panelists today are Sylvain Riba. He's the managing director of TotalEnergies' Carolina Long Bay offshore wind project. John Weiland, the chief development officer from Leeward Renewable Energy. Joshua Rogol, president, Strata Clean Energy. And Ryan Brown, COO of energyRe. Our panelists, again, will discuss what types of things their companies are hoping to target, what aspects of the IRA that they've sought to seek benefit from, and then what are some of the things that, from a strategic standpoint, what are some of the things that they are anticipating or not anticipating they might get from the IRA. So with that, our first speaker, Sylvain Riba, as I said, is the managing director for TotalEnergies' Carolina Long Bay offshore wind project. Sylvain has more than 20 years of international experience within the energy industry as a business unit leader. Prior to his current role, Sylvain was head of strategy for exploration in the Americas, managing investments in Suriname, Brazil, Gulf of Mexico, and Guyana. And it was in those roles that he led negotiations of operatorship and production sharing contracts with public authorities, private partners, and others. Sylvain has an executive MBA from the Jones Graduate School of Business at Rice, an MSc from IFP School in France, and a master's degree from the School of the Mines, Nancy. And with that, Sylvain.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Well, I'm glad to talk to you about tax at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so thank you for being here. A long story short, so TotalEnergies, we're a multi-energy company. As just mentioned, my background is actually oil and gas, and we transition into different things that we bring to customers. And here, specifically in the Carolinas, we are developing a 1.2 gigawatt offshore wind project off the coast of Wilmington, about 22 miles from the coast over there. The goal is to develop that over the next decade, so we could bring power in the early 2030s to the state of North Carolina. So excited to be here and talk a little bit about the IRA. I'll be really brief, but for me, what's important for all of us to remember and remind is it's a unique opportunity to have access to clean energy at a very affordable price. That's one of the big elements that a country like the US has put in place to develop and produce energy in an affordable way. And it's something which is instrumental to what we are trying to achieve here in North Carolina, but also in other states in the US. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Our next panelist, John Weiland, is the Chief Development Officer at Leeward Renewable Energy. John leads Leeward's development team overseeing the strategic growth of wind, solar, and energy storage developments spanning over 125 projects. He has more than 19 years of diverse professional experience across energy, real estate development, and construction management, including over 14 years of renewable energy development. Mr. Weiland joined Leeward in 2019, and prior to a CDO appointment, led solar energy storage development efforts across the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast United States, which included, day-to-day management of a multi-gigawatt solar and energy storage development portfolio. He holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business.
Thanks, Frank. And no, I am not related to Scott Weiland, okay? As Frank mentioned, I lead the development efforts for Leeward Renewable Energy. We're a national independent power producer. We own, develop, and operate large-scale solar, wind, and battery energy storage. Sitting here on stage, I never would have imagined speaking to you all 20 years ago or so. I actually got my start in high-rise construction management and development in Chicago, and I thought I wanted to be the next apprentice, putting my thumbprint on the skyline. The global financial crisis hit, and as fate would have it, that was right around the time that the American Recovery Act under Barack Obama was creating incentives for renewable energy. And I found my way into renewables. And honestly, at that point, back in 2009, I thought it was going to be a waypoint. But I stuck around long enough for the miracle to happen. And here we sit in 2024, and we have the IRA that was introduced 2 years ago, and we're in the middle of an absolute renaissance in renewable energy. And excited to be here, excited to speak to you all about what we do and the IRA.
Thanks, John. Our next panelist is Josh Rogol. He's the president of Strata Clean Energy. He leads the origination and development across the United States for Strata's solar and battery storage portfolio. He's been in renewables since 2006. Prior to Strata, he led global sales and strategy for a leading energy storage technology manufacturer, developing the company's first utility scale project in Europe, microgrid facility in Nicaragua, and behind-the-meter C&I project in the United States. His professional experience includes work in development, finance, manufacturing, and many others. He holds a degree a Bachelor of Arts degree from Tufts University, as well as
we can move on.
A university in Chile. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the name.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's really good to be here. I know this is the last panel of the day, but I think it'll be a fun topic with a diverse set of experience across technologies. So we have offshore wind, solar, batteries, onshore, some folks thinking about green hydrogen and P2X. With respect to the IRA, it is transformative. It's an accelerant that brings a tremendous amount of certainty over the next decade and beyond. And so for those that have been in and around renewables for some time, there's been this trend of start and stop, where you're up against December 31st and expiring credits. And so everyone pushing to try to close deals for the end of the year because you don't know what the next year is going to bring. And uncertainty is really bad for the development of clean energy, for the financing of clean energy, for employment around clean energy. It leads to starting and stopping in a way that's unpredictable, and I think just leads to bad outcomes. And the fact that we have a decade of clarity, I think, is really important to the sustained energy transition that we're wading into here. So I think that's the fundamentals are there. We'll talk today about it's not all rainbows and sunshine with the IRA, and there's a lot that is remaining to be clarified, to potentially be fixed through clarifications, amending of rules, changing due to comments. So we'll talk about some of that today, but in general, I think it's a tremendous tailwind, and it'll lead to a lot of clean electrons going onto the grid.
Thanks, Josh. And last but not least, our final panelist, Ryan Brown, is the COO of energyRe. Prior to joining energyRe, Ryan was Executive Vice President of EDP Renewables North America for the Eastern region, Mexico and Canada, leading the company's business in Eastern MISO, PJM, New York ISO, ISO New England, the Southeast, Mexico and Canada, as well as overseeing government and regulatory affairs for the platform. Ryan was responsible for a region that successfully developed 33 wind and solar projects totaling nearly 4,300 megawatts in operation or under development. He's a graduate of University of Chicago and holds master's or executive education course completions from Chicago and Rice University as well.
Great. Thank you and good afternoon. It's great to be on a college campus and at another clean tech conference. I feel like I'm on a panel discussion tour these last few months. Last week I was in Phoenix. In February I was at some other school in Michigan that you probably never heard of. I won't mention, maybe a rival of UNC. But it's super energizing, right, to be around students in this environment. And I think this is a super exciting opportunity. I think, one of the things you should take away from today is this is a multi-decade endeavor, right? And so for people that are still getting their education, this is a place where the challenges are huge, the work is super interesting, and it is a place where you can apply yourself and feel great and really strong about the work that you're doing and driven to do it. I've been in the space for 20 plus years, primarily as a developer. But if I think back about all the opportunities it's afforded me, I never would have guessed as an undergrad that this is what I'd be doing today. So I hope everyone feels that excitement. Maybe not at 5 o'clock on Thursday when the NCAA basketball games are going on, but you could feel it in the other room during the days. And to me, it's reinvigorating to be around people that are excited about this. And I think this is a very, very exciting moment. I currently work for a company called energyRe. It was founded by the principals of the Related Companies, which is one of the largest private real estate developers in the US. They've developed big, ambitious projects like Hudson Yards in New York City, and they pivoted to renewables, and so brought a group of us over a couple of years ago to launch one of the largest clean energy projects in the history of the country. It's called Clean Path New York. And it is a underground 178-mile HVDC, so high voltage direct current transmission line from upstate New York, where renewables are plentiful, into New York City. Sounds simple. The transmission is probably a $4 billion investment, and then it's also coupled with about $7 or $8 billion worth of generation upstate. So trying to solve the tale of two grids, the last 20 years we've built a lot of renewable generation in this country where we could build it, where it was easiest. It's very challenging to get renewables to big load centers, especially big load centers that are carbon intensive grids. And so we're set out to try to solve that problem with our project. We currently have an offtake agreement for 25 years from the state of New York, who sort of followed up their policy goals with an implementation that said, we're willing to pay for that. We're willing to solve the chicken and the egg issue in renewables and transmission development, right? They said, we'll pay a contract that pays for the transmission and the generation, so that you're not in a situation, which many of us are in other parts of the country, where the transmission developer says, I'll build the transmission generation if you show up, and the generation says, we'll build our generation if the transmission shows up, and you get stuck. So it's a really innovative and exciting project, one that is launched and further, it was there pre-IRA, but it has a lot of momentum and forward movement because of the IRA. We have other business units. We also are the holder of one of the largest, or the largest offshore wind power purchase agreement in the United States. We have a lease area off the coast of New Jersey. Similar idea, bringing clean energy to a very major load center. We were just awarded an offtake from that state in January. And then here in the Carolinas, we own an onshore developer based in Charleston, South Carolina. About 20 folks that have been developing solar and storage facilities over the last few decades, and so super excited about that. We're building one of the largest batteries in the Carolinas right now in central South Carolina, a 200 megawatt hour battery facility. So lots of exciting activities. Looking forward to the discussion on the IRA. Maybe I'll just add to Josh's, he stole my observation, but on the IRA, but I think we've never had this, right? Like the certainty allows us to behave like a mature industry, to grow and advance as a mature industry. I mean, I can tell you loads of stories of tax credit expirations on December 31st and sitting in a construction trailer and trying to drive to get a project done, or buying solar modules 4 years in advance to qualify for a tax credit that really didn't make sense because the technology continued to evolve. So that certainty is allowing this industry to really grow up and become, and have the potential, achieve the potential that it's always had.
Thank you, Ryan. You bring up the certainty aspect of the IRA, which is critical and important and awesome. But Josh touched on it. There's uncertainty out there as well. And this is kind of for all of you guys. But what do you see as the biggest challenges in what are the biggest uncertainties presenting the biggest challenges to the development of your projects, potential development of your projects right now?
Sure. I'll give a couple of examples. So under the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a few categories, as you think about solar or storage, that can be economic adders. So you get an additional consideration if you use domestic content in your project. That can give you a 10% adder beyond the 30% base case. And then there's something called an energy community. So if you're in a transitioning community away from coal or oil and gas, and there's certain attributes related to decommissioning or unemployment, then you can get an additional consideration on top of that. That's an additional 10%. With the former, the rules as they've come out are extremely onerous. And basically, if you think about it from like a battery storage lens, no one knows if they qualify, right? And so you have an end user that wants the clarity. You have a developer that wants an uplift in their economics. You have a supplier that doesn't know or doesn't want to make representations around exactly how it's going to work or take the risk. And so it's like, as the rules are unclear, who takes what risk and gets what benefit over what time leads to a lot of confusion and uncertainty. And so when we're trying to bring these projects from development into financing through construction, it takes an incredible amount of work to try to identify and allocate those risks with a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So you have to leave a bunch of things open, right? And so that's bad for everybody. And so as we think about riding the momentum and ensuring that we're able to capitalize on all the opportunity set, until we get that clarity, until the rules are clarified, reformed, implemented, there's a bunch of starting and stopping that's continuing as we think about specific attributes of big portions of the rules that are happening today.
Yeah, I echo what Josh said about the uncertainty around domestic content adders. That applies not only to battery energy storage, but PV and wind as well. So we're eagerly anticipating some refreshed guidance from the IRS that hopefully puts this to bed. But I would say one of the biggest issues that we're facing as a result of the IRA is there's so much activity in the market that interconnection queues are absolutely jammed up. And the incentives for development are very robust. It's clear that renewables in every market in the US is competitive. It's just access to the grid and finding those points of injection, like Ryan was talking about, getting large-scale renewables to those load centers. That's a challenge right now. I would say that, along with some of the permitting delays and other permitting issues, are probably the two biggest things that we face.
Maybe I can add on to that. I think a couple of things that the IRA didn't do one of which we just talked about, which is it didn't incentivize new transmission in a meaningful way, right? There was a lot of talk and negotiation about that policy. There was going to be an investment tax credit for transmission to accelerate the growth and deployment, and that fell out, right? For many reasons we could have a beer over, but it didn't make it in. And so the ability, at least on the electric side, the speed limit of the IRA is that interconnection process. It is the grid, right? It's super important for people to understand. And so that grid, I just looked, I'm kind of a dork, but I live in the Midwest ISO. It's one of the largest grid operators in the US. Right now, it's producing 70,000 megawatts. I think just in the last window in which developers could apply to interconnect to that grid, so 70,000 megawatts operating right now. I think over 100,000 megawatts applied in just one queue window to get in line, to be studied, to connect their projects. That's completely untenable. And those processes are dragging out and taking 5, 6, 7 years. Oftentimes, all the costs are borne by the developers, and so it can make projects uneconomic. So that is a big area that policy didn't fully address. There are mechanisms and processes in which it could be addressed, but it was not. And so I think that's a huge limiting factor on how fast our industry can grow, at least on the electric side at the utility scale.
Thank you. On that, something to remember in terms of utility scale project, to piggyback on what you just said, is timing. Timing is of the essence here. The IRA has a 10-year window, which seems a lot for a human being, but for developing large projects like what we do, this is pretty much the amount of time we need to go through permitting, stakeholder engagement, designing the system, working the supply chain, finding the economic development areas. And that's one risk that we see, which is very quickly you can get out of the IRA timeframe. We have 10 years, but those 10 years started 2 years ago. We just have 8 years now. And every time you're delaying, suspending, discussing, you hit on those 8 to 10 years. And as a developer, the risk is on us. I mean, you put the money up front, you have no safety net. You're just hoping you can get there on time. One point which is important is, in order to qualify for the IRA, your development has to start before 2031 or 2032. So we still have 8 years to get there. And again, it seems a lot, but for large utility scale project, it is not. We are racing against time. And that's something which is not obvious, but it's worth reminding. You know, the change in the way power is being built and produced is taking a lot of time to be implemented.
One other thing I will note, since we were talking about the interconnection queues being very long, some people sometimes question why it does take so long. Interconnection queues were designed for maybe 5 large assets at most in them. Think like big gas plant, nuclear plant, coal plant. When you put 100 renewable or distributed energy projects into the queue along with some gas projects and others, they all have to be studied. They're studied sequentially. So as one's added in at the end, it's studied against what's in the front, and it just bogs down the whole process. So one of the things that utilities are looking at is cluster studies. It's sort of, I guess PJM is getting into this and others, but it's, and MISO is as well. So it could help address some of that issue, but it's more to come on kind of how that's going to shake out.
Yeah, I think there's also another issue and a call to action for folks in the audience. So us as developers are hiring away all of the engineers from the utilities and the ISOs and RTOs. So all the people that are supposed to be studying these projects are getting paid more to come and work at developers. And so we have a human capital constraint with competent engineers that can help evaluate and allow generators to come onto the grid. So if you have any engineering buddies, please suggest that they apply for open jobs.
I would argue and say there isn't a human capital constraint, given the folks in this room on this campus. It's a matter of them coming into the industry and the RTOs, the ISOs, TOs actually paying them appropriately. That's why we're able to hire them away, because we see the value of the resource and we're paying them more. But I think if they're properly incentivized, the talent could be attracted. So you electrical engineers, plenty of opportunity.
Everybody works for utility in here, just, they might be coming after you now. One thing that I've always kind of wondered about, we see the IRA at the federal level, but the policy rules or standards at the local, state, community levels, in some cases they help, in some cases they don't. What is it that we need more of at that below the federal level in terms of policy to help drive the full potential of the IRA?
I'll take a first crack. Yeah, that's a really good question, Frank, because you see dichotomies across different states. Take Ohio with their Senate Bill 52, which created additional obstacles to large-scale renewable development, versus the state of Michigan, which implemented legislation that enabled developers to call upon a state review process, essentially loosening that local control. And there's different opinions across different stakeholders in terms of whether that control should be more local versus at a state level. But I think ultimately it's incumbent upon us, developers, as well as folks that are coming into the industry, to really put our best foot forward and come into communities with positive intent and a win-win attitude. How do we create a partnership with the communities in which we're developing in, so that we are able to generate the positive momentum necessary to thwart the NIMBYism, the not in my backyard that you see popping up over and over again in communities where, or in states where there's been a few bad apples, and those bad examples are leveraged as reason why our projects shouldn't be developed within communities. And it is a significant problem. And we are consuming a lot of real estate with our projects. We're talking about 8 to 10 acres per megawatt AC of solar, 80 acres per megawatt for wind. We're talking tens of thousands of acres. And so we need to be good stewards of the land. And we need to set a good example so that we have more states looking at us as a compatible land use, as opposed to something that they want to push out of their states and localities.
I think we're seeing at the local level, particularly in conservative communities, folks that are angry about the IRA. And so the action that we've seen taken as a result is solar land use caps, moratoriums in some cases, where at the local level there's this distaste for the federal policy incentivizing renewables, and so they take it into the county level permitting process and saying like no more, or they're obstructionists. And so engaging early in an organized way with talking points that speak to both sides of the aisle, citing projects well, and engaging stakeholders early is important. And I mentioned it this morning when we were talking about batteries specifically. Like what we're seeing is there is a story of haves and have-nots, where folks that have talented interconnection capabilities, folks that have talented permitting and community engagement capabilities, engineering capabilities, all of this really matters in bringing a good high quality project together. Whereas in the rear view mirror, there was a bunch of people that were throwing spaghetti against the wall previously and hoping a bunch of stuff would stick. And that just doesn't really work anymore. You need to be surgical, and there's a flight to quality over quantity. And so, like, as it pertains to the IRA specifically, we are seeing some backlash at the permitting level.
I'll just, at the state level, maybe not everyone realizes this, but prior to the IRA, which is, again, it's the first time we've had a long-ish term energy policy, but it's a tax policy, right? It's through the tax code. It is a carrot-based incentive system to get people to transition and change our energy system. There are 30 states, I think, maybe I'll be corrected, that have state-level renewable portfolio standards, which have driven, in a lot of ways, demand over the last few decades. And those are goals for them to hit renewables at certain percentages by certain years, really continue to ramp up in the years ahead. And I think those will continue to be really important demand drivers. But I think I alluded to in my opening statement, the states that have that and the states that want to go to 100% renewables have to understand that they need to make the investments and enable the development to happen in their states to achieve those goals. So you guys just hit on permitting, like the states are, have to have a coherent and thoughtful way to get projects built. On the transmission front, I mentioned New York, which is enabling transmission to get built from upstate New York to New York City. A decade plus ago, Texas built loops of transmission out to West Texas to bring it back into the load centers. New Jersey, just recently, we're a beneficiary of this. New Jersey said it's our goal to get 7.5 gigawatts of offshore wind built. Well, instead of asking every developer to pursue interconnection, just like we do onshore, they said, no, we're going to take control of that process. They went to the grid operator, studied the best solution, ran a competitive RFP, and the state is funding and raising their hand saying, we want the policy and we're going to enable it. And they're building the interconnection capacity for 4.5 gigawatts of offshore wind to connect in a thoughtful and sort of planned way, as opposed to all of us trying to connect, wherever we think connection is best. And so those are a couple examples, I think, of state level policies, and we need to see a lot more of that to really see the full potential of the IRA.
I agree. I mean, if you ask yourself, local versus global, to get back to your question, it's always a local decision. At the end of the day, what the IRA does is it gives a pool of money which is available to reduce the cost to local stakeholders accessing energy cheaply. But at the end of the day, the decision is made at a local level, at a state level, at a county level. If you take North Carolina, for example, which is a regulated market with two main contributors to the debate. One is a regulated company, a utility company, and the other one is the North Carolina Utilities Commission. A decision has to happen in order to implement new type of energy, for example, offshore wind, but it's true in hydrogen or battery storage or large utility scale solar development, and the decision is there. The IRA is only a tool to reduce the cost, but it's not an enabler of a local decision, which is dearly needed.
Thank you guys for that answer. What questions does the audience have?
Ian Hitchcock, I'm a Master's of Public Policy student over at Duke, and as part of my master's thesis, I'm looking into the energy communities provision, and so I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit more y'all's thoughts on kind of the effectiveness of those. I'd love to know if you have seen the energy communities provisions, particularly that adder, to the extent that you can articulate it actually lead to new projects being created that wouldn't otherwise exist. And I just also wanted to make sure that you were talking about two different
Sure. The last question first, and then we could go around the horn. I was speaking around the complexity around the domestic content adder specifically as having the way that you can achieve that adder is impractical. Like no suppliers will have a very difficult time complying with it and providing the information to allow you to successfully achieve it. And so like they need to rework the rules there. With respect to energy communities in general, it's more clear. It's based on NAICS codes, which you understand what you get, and you run a formula or calculation, and you get it or you don't. And I'd say the punchline from our perspective is that it is driving development in communities that do need to be brought along as part of the energy transition, and it's creating jobs in those communities. And so I think rules could always be improved upon. However, the goal of what they were trying to achieve with this policy, I think broadly is working, and you can see a tremendous amount of activity from the development community going to places and working to development projects within these communities. So that policy-driven approach within the code seems to be working quite well.
Can I just add real quick that piggybacking a little bit, any project that is being implemented right now probably existed pre-IRA. What that, specific to the energy community adder though, what that does, we have such a competitive industry. These are not windfalls to developers. What they are is they're pass-throughs. So it allows us to be more competitive. And so those projects that qualify for energy community adder gets the incremental tax credit, which then allows the developer to be more competitive and offer a power purchase agreement offtake at a lower price, which then beats the competing projects. That might not survive, it might not be like that forever, but for the moment, what you're seeing is competitive RFPs. Projects that have locations in energy communities are kind of the first to get picked because they're very, very competitive.
One other thing I'll add, so the energy community aspect, talked about former fossil coal sites, things like that. There's also a provision in the energy communities, if the community, county, municipality has an unemployment rate that outpaces the federal average, that actually qualifies for energy communities. And I actually have seen 2 battery projects that we were part of helping site, where they were basically, the battery could have landed anywhere within a 100-mile stretch on a transmission line. They purposely targeted areas where they knew there was no chance that the unemployment rate in that area was ever going to get better than the federal average.
Yeah, I echo what's been said. In terms of our prospecting activities for new developments, that's one of the first screens that we put on is the energy community screen. And there's certain energy community qualifications like coal retirement, coal-fired generation retirement, where it's very binary, you either qualify or you don't. The MSA, non-MSA employment numbers, there's a degree of certainty or uncertainty depending on how close you are to that national average and when you expect to start construction or be in service. But it is a tremendous incentive, and it's doing its job, if you ask me.
Hi, I don't quite know how to phrase this question, but I'll give it a try. In terms of getting things moving and de-risking, are there any kind of insurance products or people coming up with insurance products like domestic content, not having certainty around it, and saying, I'll step in and provide an insurance product if this doesn't come through so the deal can flow? Are you seeing that kind of industry offering show up? And that seems like a whole other industry unto itself that could also move things along.
We haven't implemented any insurance product for that, but I'm sure that there's folks out there that are evaluating the risk, and potentially there may be folks underwriting it. I'm not aware.
One of the sponsors of the event is here. I don't know if she's here right now, but she'll be around, and they are very active in the insurance space for renewables. It's something that they're thinking about. They have an offering around. It's the value is in the details, right? So like, what are the exclusions to the policy, and what's the value that it's actually it's providing? And so folks are coming to market with solutions to wrap various types of risk, but you got to make sure that like it is the fundamental risk and doesn't just make you feel good about having a policy when there's not actually substance there. And so there's a very active insurance market within the like renewable space broadly. People are trying to solve the problem, and I'd say it's kind of early innings of working through it.
What other questions? Go ahead.
Can you elaborate on the wage requirements? That's another add-on, or maybe a new requirement. How do you deal, or how do you incorporate those new requirements? Is it challenging to prove that you're paying at the level, or like, what's happening behind the scenes of the requirements?
Maybe I can start. It's state and state dependent. So in some states, it's fairly easy to do so. You were mentioning New Jersey, New York. That's fairly easy. In other states, it's a little bit more challenging to access that. But in general, it's feasible. One point, though, to come back to your point, when you're looking for tax credits, you don't necessarily talk to the government. You actually talk to a tax credit partner, to someone that has that amount of tax to offset. And it's also part of the discussion is, who has that amount of money? How do you negotiate that? If you deal with, utility scale project, 1-2 gigawatt, you're talking about billions of dollars. 30 to 50% of that is still a couple billions. So you need to find someone that has the ability to deliver that. And then you enter into those type of negotiation with them is how much money can we get, how exactly, what can we bring to the table, which add a layer of complexity in the discussion.
Maybe I'd heard tax credit. So that is one other thing, one significant innovation that the IRA allows, which is transferability of the tax credits. And so, for those that don't know, we use tax equity, right? Because a lot of our projects can't efficiently monetize and use those tax credits. So in the past, we were required to form a partnership and bring in an entity like a big bank that could use those tax credits, and we would be in that partnership together. The transferability now allows us to actually sell those tax credits to someone outside the partnership, and so that brings in a whole new universe of tax equity, not just a few big banks, but smaller banks, private wealth offices, corporates, all kinds of new folks. And if you think about what Sylvain just said, an offshore wind project is going to have potentially a multi-billion-dollar tax equity need. The whole tax equity market pre-IRA was max $20 billion. And I think the transferability market just opened up at the end of last year, and it was already $5 or $6 billion. So that's going to have to grow massively, and people are innovating around that, being brokers, creating markets, aggregating lots of different investors into a bigger pool to do tax equity. So that's another area that isn't 100% certain yet, but seems to be advancing very, very quickly.
And it needs to advance quickly just because of the tax equity pool through the traditional partnership route, and it's exciting. But to your question regarding the wage requirements, there's the prevailing wage requirements as well as apprenticeship requirements, and they are causing angst amongst folks in terms of ensuring that those standards are upheld, because if they aren't upheld, the penalties could be quite severe. And if you were to talk to our council, it's something that keeps them up at night. And while they draft what they think are ironclad agreements with our EPC contractors and the like. At the end of the day, if those contractors don't perform according to the requirements, it comes back to us. So it's something that we're going to have to be very vigilant about going forward to ensure that we meet those standards, not just the wage, but the apprenticeship requirements as well.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Everybody can get to cocktail hour. We only finished a little late, so. Yeah, we technically were on time. Let the record show. Thank you, guys.